Good morning and greetings from Brooklyn, New York. I want to begin by thanking the organizers who made this socially distanced event possible, and especially Professor Jane Collins for inviting me back again to participate in this year's symposium. A little over a year ago, I also gave the keynote address for the previous conference on staging mixed reality. I joked at the time that given the topic, I should have appeared as a hologram. Be careful what you wish for. Although I'm not a hologram, here I am virtually, doubly virtual, in fact, because what you are seeing and hearing now was recorded about 2 weeks ago. For me, as I speak these words, it is now. But between my now and your now, as you are hearing this, approximately 5,390,000 babies will have been born around the world, and about 3 million people will have died. And who knows what personal, political, or natural events will have transpired during that time. The monarchy may have collapsed. Some of you may have been at the last symposium, sitting shoulder to shoulder with around 80 other individuals in the Clore Learning Center at the National Theater. Where are you now? In all likelihood, you are watching this on a computer or similar device from a room in your home, probably by yourself. A little later this morning, I will be joining you and the other presenters live, although if you are watching this in the UK, I will be 3,500 miles away, and for me, it will be 5 hours earlier than it is for you. I will have transcended time and space. I am reminded of a relatively little known science fiction short story by E.M. Forster, better known, of course, for his novels like Howard's End and A Room with a View. The story is called The Machine Stops. Published in 1909, it depicts a human society now living underground, each person in a small room. Individuals communicate via something that bears a striking resemblance to texting and social media platforms. Everything is under the control of the omnipotent, capital M, machine, which is worshipped as a god or an occult-like religion. This was written 112 years ago. I know that much of what I am saying about our current technocracy is well known to all of you, but I raise it in order to situate this symposium in the larger sphere of how we experience the world today and what its implications are for the theater. Will theater be affected by our increasingly mediatized interaction with the world? Or, to take the theme of this year's symposium, what does it mean to stage the future? There is a wonderful line from Thornton Wilder's play, The Skin of Our Teeth, in which the character of the fortune teller says, "I tell the future, nothing easier, but who can tell you your past?" It is easy to predict the future, but foolish. So I will not predict. And even though I am a historian, I will not try to tell you your past. Rather, I will offer some observations and raise some questions about the present. Primarily, I'm going to talk about space and the experience of space in our digital screen-based world. The great French actor and director Jean-Louis Barrault, in his 1951 book, Reflections on the Theater, declared that theater is the art of the human being in space. He goes on to say that it is impossible, quote, to isolate man from his space. But today, I'm not sure that is entirely true. Interestingly, in E.M. Forster's story, a character who wants to escape from his underground confines to the surface of the earth says, "You know that we have lost the sense of space. We say space is annihilated, but what we have annihilated is not space, but the sense thereof." And that is really my topic, the loss of the sense of space. I believe we are at a watershed moment in theater history. Almost exactly a year ago, theaters all around the globe were shuttered in the face of the pandemic. Productions were closed and those in process were suspended, with often devastating financial effects on theaters and especially the individuals whose livelihood comes from the theater. Some are slowly reopening in China, Australia, Russia, and elsewhere. Others are finding inventive ways to accommodate an audience, such as the Moonlight Mobile Theater in Japan. Of course, this is not the first time theaters have been closed for the plague. As I'm sure most of you know, the London theaters of the late 16th and early 17th centuries were closed multiple times. In fact, as we sank deeper into lockdown last spring, several news stories made us feel totally inadequate by noting that Shakespeare wrote King Lear during one of those periods. Aside from the fact that that might not be precisely true, it is also unfair. Shakespeare by that time was wealthy. He had a huge house in Stratford with servants. He did not have to go to endless Zoom meetings and symposia. And well, he was Shakespeare. More to the point, during these hiatuses, the theater companies often toured the provinces. However, during these periods, there were no alternative forms of mass entertainment available to the populace. When the actors returned to London, the material conditions of the theater and the fundamental production practices were largely unchanged. Throughout history, despite disruptions for plague, war, or the Visigoths, theater always bounced back. Granted, after the Visigoths, it took about 700 years. The style and content of the drama may have changed, the shape of the theater may have changed, the social and class makeup of the audience may have changed. But the underlying principles of the art form of theater were essentially the same. So why should this interruption be any different? I should say up front that I am not predicting the death of theater. Although the collateral damage to many theater institutions may be significant, there will once again be musicals on Broadway and the West End, Shakespeare festivals will reopen, operas will be revived, and smaller theaters will once again cater to the needs of discrete communities and social groups. But I think that for the past century or so, theater has been increasingly confronted with a challenge it never faced in its entire history: the impact of electronic and more recently, digital media. Yes, theater has always welcomed new technologies, from the magic lantern to computerized lighting control, but it always occurred within the artistic and significantly physical confines of the theater. New media, however, has created new audiences whose interaction with digital performance is entirely divorced from theater. It essentially eliminates the experience of physical space and thus creates a spectator whose perceptual understanding of performance is radically different than that of a spectator who has known only spatial performance. In fact, I would suggest it has altered the very definition of a spectator. I must acknowledge that even this proposition has been complicated by virtual reality, in which a person wearing a head-mounted VR device can actually experience a sense of place, although it is entirely virtual. As the closure of the theaters deprived audiences of the spatial experience of performance and drove more people to the virtual, to the kingdom of Zoom, there is a risk of further depletion of what the semiotics would call competent spectators, meaning spectators who can read and decipher theatrical codes and signs. So let me begin with the audience. When you are planning to see a play or opera or ballet, how do you express it? You say, I'm going to the theater. Throughout history, in order to experience a performer, you had to go from one place, your home, your office, wherever, to another, the site of the performance. You make a journey, a pilgrimage of sorts, on foot, by car, by public transportation. Often the site to which you are going is in a place you do not go on a regular basis. No self-respecting New Yorker would be caught dead in Times Square except to go to the Broadway theater. The site is often a liminal space, an entertainment district, a decaying industrial area, a repurposed armory. Historically, going to the theater often meant going outside of the city, from the space of daily life to a specialized extra-daily site of performance, whether the southwest slope of the Acropolis in ancient Athens, or across the Thames in the 16th century to the theaters in the sketchy environs of the South Bank. In using terms like pilgrimage and liminality, I am invoking the anthropologist Victor Turner. And while I realize that within the world of anthropology, his theories have been challenged of late, they are still useful for examining the process of theater going. Simply put, going to the theater involves a pilgrimage to a liminal space. The social scientist and geographer Doreen Massey has pointed out that exploration and the, quote, voyage of discovery involve the crossing and conquering of space. When we go to the theater, we move through space to get there. And the significant fact for me is that this journey through space effects a transformation. Having transcended that space, upon entering the performance site, you become a spectator. Furthermore, not just anyone can enter this sanctified space. You must be invited, initiated, or at least have a ticket, which is a kind of passport. The OED defines passport as an authorization to, quote, travel to, from, or through a foreign country. What better definition of going to the theater can we have than traveling to a foreign country? Today, of course, the question of who is invited, who gets a passport, raises myriad issues of class, race, gender, ethnicity, etc. But for the moment, I'm interested primarily in questions of movement. For thousands of years, from rituals, ceremonial and celebratory events, and well into the 20th century, the theatrical event in every part of the world depended upon, in fact, required the transformation of an individual into a spectator, usually along with a collective of spectators. And until recently, this transformation could be accomplished only by movement through space. For the past year, however, for many of us, this entailed, at best, the movement from one room in our abode to another. But of course, even pre-pandemic spectatorship had been changing. For spectators of the digital, the process of transformation was essentially eliminated. A performance could literally be carried in your pocket. While riding the underground, just pull out your smartphone, put in your earbuds, and watch something on the tiny screen. To become a spectator today is casual and fluid, something you can opt in and out of at will. Space is not a factor. Okay, the world is changing, and I'm not here to be a curmudgeonly Luddite. So we no longer have to move through space to become a spectator. We can become a spectator simply by pushing a button or telling Siri or Alexa or whatever you call your digital servant to turn on another digital device. But one thing has not changed. When watching a performance, you know where you are. Whether you are sitting in the Royal Albert Hall or in your bedroom, you are somewhere and you know exactly where that is. But in the world of digital performance, where is the performance you are watching? To borrow a phrase from Gertrude Stein, there is no there. At the start of this presentation, I said, greetings from Brooklyn. How do you know that's where I am? I could be in Los Angeles or Paris. What you see behind me now lets you know that this is my study. And if you were like everyone else these days, you'll be checking out the decor and trying to read the book titles on my shelves. And while that tells you something about me, it tells you nothing about my location. I could be in Milton Keynes. I suggested that a theater spectator is created through an act of transformation. I would argue that the creation of a theatrical space also entails a transformation, not by movement, but through a kind of consecration. The first definition of consecrate, once again in the OED, is to set apart. The way in which we set one space apart from another is to section it off from the surrounding space, to delineate it. In other words, to create a frame. Sometimes this is done literally, a proscenium arch, obviously, or a simple raised platform. And sometimes it is done implicitly through movement or light. In the traditional English mumming play, for instance, the performers entered a home or an inn, sometimes literally sweeping the occupants of the room into a circle with a broom, while chanting some variant of "Room, room, brave gallants all, pray give us room to rhyme." The performers created a stage by reframing the space of the room. The performers and spectators were standing on the same floorboards, but for the duration of the performance, the stage space had become inviolable. There was an onstage and an offstage. The cultural theorist Michel de Certeau defined the difference between place and space with the concise formula, space is practiced place. He was describing the life of cities, and he defined place as the material structure of a city, the buildings, roads, sidewalks, and so on. But it was the inhabitants, through their use of that place, their movements and patterns, the result of living and working within that place, that transformed it into a space. The same is true of the stage. The stage is merely a structure, a place where a performance might occur. It is the performers and their use of the stage that transforms it into a performance space, which simultaneously creates the total theater environment. In a way, this is what Peter Brook meant when he told us about the empty space. In de Certeau's scheme, it is really an empty place, but regardless of terminology, it was through use, through practice, that the empty space became a living stage. In a related vein, Polish director Tadeusz Kantor remarked, "I am fascinated by a mystical or utopian idea and a supposition that in every work of art there exists some kind of matter that is independent of an artist, that shapes itself and that grounds all possible infinite variants of life. This matter is space." A few lines later, he declares, "Space is not a passive receptacle in which objects and forms are posited. Space itself is an object of creation. And the main one, space is charged with energy. It shrinks and expands, and these motions mold forms and objects. It is space that gives birth to forms." I should provide a verbal footnote. The quote is from a collection of essays and manifestos by Kantor called A Journey Through Other Spaces. But I was reminded about this text in David Weil's superb book, A History of Western Performance Space, which I highly recommend to anyone interested in the subject. Kantor concludes, "It is space that conditions the network of relations and tensions between objects. Tension is the principal actor of space." In any performance space, there is an ongoing negotiation between audience and stage, a kind of tension. Even in a proscenium-style theater with spectators planted firmly in their seats, the audience has a sense of space, the space in which they are sitting, the distance to the stage, and an intuitive grasp of the space of the stage, and in cases of illusionistic scenography, a perceptual understanding of the fictional space represented. Actors are likewise in a complex process of negotiation with the space of the stage, with other performers, with all aspects of the scenography, and with the space of the audience and the communication between stage and auditorium. When these tensions are in perfect balance, we, the audience, can momentarily forget where we are and project ourselves onto the world of the stage, which was Richard Wagner's goal at Bayreuth, which you are seeing right now. Sometimes, however, this negotiation can fail. The Vivian Beaumont Theater at Lincoln Center in New York, co-designed by Joe Melziner with architect Eero Saarinen, opened in 1965 and immediately developed a reputation as an architecturally problematic space for theater. Melziner's well-intentioned idea was to combine a proscenium with a thrust. Years later, the great designer Ming-Cho Lee, who had been Melziner's assistant, had a brilliant analysis of why it was problematic. A proscenium theater is what Lee referred to as a theater with two roofs. The audience and the stage occupy two separate architectural spaces, and the audience in one space observes the performance in the other. A typical thrust theater is, as Lee described it, a theater with one roof. Crucially, in this arrangement, the mechanics of the stage visibly cover the auditorium and stage alike, creating an architecturally shared environment. But while the seating of the Beaumont enveloped the thrust stage, as was typical, Melziner hid the lighting equipment and made the walls black, in essence created, as Lee observed, a two-roof environment within a one-roof space, thus triggering a kind of cognitive dissonance. The problems were so acute that the theater actually closed for a while in the early 80s. In other words, the space thwarted the crucial spectator-stage negotiation. Cantor's tension, in this case, destroyed the possibility of communication. It was renovated twice and now looks like this, with the lights most definitely visible. The stage itself, the space of the stage, can be a site of transformation. In the kind of performance in which actors take on fictional identities and enact a fictional story, we are usually asked to believe that the stage is not a stage, but a different locale altogether. The character of the prologue in Plautus's Menechmi, for instance, could be anticipating Cantor's notion of shrinking and expanding space and giving birth to forms when he explains to the audience, this, referring to the stage, is the city of Epidamnus while this play is acted. When another shall be acted, it will become another town. And of course, the prologue in Henry V famously asks, can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? We are being asked to accept that the stage, a concrete place right in front of us, is not a stage, but something else. Semiotically, it is a form of metonymy or synecdoche. One space, the stage, by means of language, action, and scenographic signifiers, represents another space. That is a transformation that can occur multiple times throughout a performance. Space as something malleable. But while we, the spectators, may willingly suspend our disbelief, we still recognize that we are in a theater looking at a stage. A digital performance on a screen can manipulate and transform the image at will, but it is not a transformation of space. It is a substitution of images. The landmark book by Philip Auslander, Liveness, explored the quality that most people believe to be the essence of theater, the live performance, which he posited in opposition to mediatized theater. I would suggest that liveness cannot be separated from experiential space. But in digital performance, whether a recording of a stage production or something created specifically for digital transmission, there is no spatial interaction beyond that of the spectator and the screen. The creators of a digital performance have no control over where the work is seen or even the size of the screen. Moreover, unless it is live streamed, there is no control over time. You can watch it any time of the day or night, and you can pause it for a few minutes to get a snack or go to the toilet. You can pause it for a day or a week and finish it later under completely different circumstances. Film, television, and digital imagery can, of course, depict space. Anthony Lane the film critic of the New Yorker magazine, in his review of the recent film, The Father, made an interesting observation. The movie was an adaptation of a play by Florian Zeller, who also co-wrote and directed the movie. And Lane noted that he had previously seen the play on stage, but, he wrote, by the following morning, I had forgotten all about it. Why then should the film make so potent an impression? Partly, he continues, because of the deeper spatial perspectives that moviegoing affords and furtiveness that they encourage. Unlike a theater audience, we can gaze down the long hallway in Anthony's apartment as he slips through a door at the end of it and peers at us darkly through a crack. The image I am showing you isn't precisely the one Lane mentioned, but you get the idea. These same depths were first explored in Jean Renoir's Rules of the Game from 1939, in which cinematographer Jean Bachelet developed a new deep focus technique that allowed both near and far objects and characters to be simultaneously in focus, thus creating new cinematic depths. But in both these examples, I would argue, we are not having an experience of space. We are seeing a representation of space. In a certain way, this is analogous to the 17th and 18th century perspective stage settings. These cinematic images may have a profound effect or aesthetic impact on our perceptions, and as with Anthony Lane's experience, be more engaging than a stage production, but we are not having a corporeal or emotional response to a physical experience of space. Now, I am not saying that any of this is bad. Film developed into perhaps the greatest art form of the 20th century. And digital performance is developing its own aesthetic and its own vocabulary that may, in fact, dominate the 21st. What I am suggesting is that in a world in which digital and screen-based media now dominate, one in which the percentage of the population that has firsthand experience of live, or I would say spatial performance, has been shrinking. There are, however, two broad categories of live performance that have actually grown more popular. On the one hand, there are stadium concerts and sporting events, probably the largest live performance events since the days of the Roman Colosseum. There is a sense of the space of the stadium, but the performance itself is largely watched on a jumbo screen inside the stadium. The mediatized image has become a quintessential component of the live event. On the other hand, there are intimate forms of live theater performance that have become very successful, immersive and site-specific productions. Both are predicated on the effects of space upon the spectator and the interaction of the spectator with that space. Audiences who may have no desire to sit in a theater and stare at far-off actors still have a desire for a kinesthetic experience of space. In this past year, the inevitable response of theater institutions attempting to maintain relevance and a connection to the audiences was to stream archival recordings of past productions. There is certainly value in making these productions available to the public, but the two-dimensionality of video and the distancing effect of technology often created a further disconnect between the vocabularies of stage production and new technologies. Some companies or performers have experimented with creating theater that specifically employs the technology and aesthetics of Zoom and other digital platforms. Some of these have been quite successful and suggest the possibilities of a new genre of Zoom theater. But while they can occasionally play with spatiality through metatheatrical referencing, the audience still cannot enter into that space. I want to conclude by returning to Gertrude Stein. Her famous phrase that I quoted earlier, "There is no there, there," taken out of context, is often seen as a put down of her birth city of Oakland, California. But it was actually more in the vein of, "You can't go home again." In her memoir, Everybody's Autobiography, she explains, "It is a funny thing about addresses where you live. When you live there, you know it so well that it is like identity. A thing that is so much a thing that it could not ever be any other thing. And then you live somewhere else, and years later, the address that was so much an address that it was a name, like your name, and you said it as if it was not an address, but something that was living. And then years after, you do not know what the address was. And when you say it, it is not a name anymore, but something you cannot remember. That is what makes your identity not a thing that exists, but something you do or do not remember." So, after we have moved away from the place we used to live, the spatial theater, and have been living for a time at the new address of the digital and the virtual, what happens when we return to our old address? Do we recognize it? Do we remember? Thank you.